that's a tough part of the job, is like calling some really good candidates that easily could have been in that lead chair, especially Ruben, who, myself, Josh, we have a tremendous relationship with and a lot of respect for, and he was super impressive, like, in the whole process. So, I think the bottom line is we all have a lot of respect for each other. So in the last couple of days, we spent, a couple of days where it's been, 15-hour days with Ruben and Craig just talking about how we're going to be better, how we're, things that we can do as a team and a coaching staff. And he's going to have a big-time voice in it. He's going to continue to get more opportunity, not just to help the pitchers and the pitching staff. Like I think Craig mentioned, like, he's a good coach. It's not just a good pitching coach. And he's got a lot of good perspectives that we even saw in this process for Josh and myself, that we want to make sure we get through to that big league clubhouse. Craig's going to use them a lot. So,
do you see his role evolving, Ruben?
Yeah, we keep talking to him about some more things that he could take on his plate that won't take away from the pitching component. But again, some of the things that he can do with our players, our staff, process-wise, he's going to continue to get more on his plate. He's going to be big. He's a big voice for us in the organization for sure.
Could that be a job title change too, or is it still pitching coach?
Yeah, we'll be talking about that over the course of the next couple of days, and when we make the staff announcements, I think we'll make sure that we have a lot of different areas covered, and Ruben's going to cover a lot of those areas. So.
Craig mentioned there being some learning curve with him in this aspect, especially the kind of in-game aspects of the job. Any concern there? You feel pretty confident that he'll get to where he needs to be to handle those in-game situations throughout the season?
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, on the pitching changes and things like that. Obviously he's been thinking the game that way, but when you're in that lead chair, it's going to be a learning curve, and there's we understand that there's going to be opportunity for him to learn and grow, and he hasn't managed a game before, so but again, like, he'll have good coaches that are around him. I think we have good people throughout the organization that he's going to lean on and rely on. Again, like, it's from his standpoint, he's always super prepared as a player. I expect the next 3-4 months, he talked about like ways he's going to try to speed up that learning curve to be prepared for the calls that he has to make starting on opening day against the Tigers. So he'll do a lot, and we'll try to help him with some of those things to simulate what he's going to see, but you never really, until you're actually in that chair, he's going to go through it. But I think the thing is, he'll learn from any whether it's a mistake or something that he wished he could have done differently. He did that as a player. He's going to do that as a manager.
Any idea in terms of hitting coach? Has that process started? Just kind of figuring out who.
Yeah. No, I think it's all pretty active right now. So I think we're already starting some of the conversations with filling out the coaching staff. We have some very good coaches here in the organization. Obviously, we mentioned Ruben, but it's a group of coaches that have been here for a while, that have done a good job with back-to-back playoff teams. So it's and Craig's like super aware of that. It's not like having a manager coming from outside that doesn't know the people that we currently have and what they bring to the table, and some areas that we can grow and learn from as well, and maybe having a different voice in a couple of those chairs. So I think the hitting coach spot with Victor going over to Houston. Third base coach, those are opportunities to grow, and then we're actively starting on that process and try to have a staff in place in the next week or so we can get going on the off season. Yeah, Craig was definitely, as a long list. So he was we just said. Craig was somebody that we've always kind of thought about in a leadership role. Whether that's managing or coaching or front office, I think that was something that we talked about for sure. And I think when Schulte made his announcement, it was a conversation with not just Craig, a few others that we have talented in the organization about, hey, are you interested? Do you want to be considered for this? And at that time for Craig, he didn't say no. But he didn't say yes, so we kind of had to make a decision, because a lot of those same people we want involved in the process of interviewing some of the candidates, just because there's a lot of trust and faith in them and their experiences and their takes. And then Craig came back a little bit after that and said he had some conversation with Audrey, and if we were interested, he'd like to be considered. So, and he was ready to do it, 100% and jump into it. So,
how do you view the stigma of there haven't been many pitchers as managers, and how do you guys plan to overcome that?
Yeah, I think again, I think it comes down to the individual and the fit, and Tom Lasorda was a Hall of Fame manager, and he was a former pitcher. So, we looked at it a lot of different ways. I think it's just getting the right individual, and Craig is different. He was different as a player. There's not a ton of relief pitchers that are leaders in a clubhouse, and he was every year he was a leader in the clubhouse with some big personalities, some big players, some big time position players that were achievers. He was somebody that shaped those clubhouses, and expect him to do the same as a manager.
You mentioned an anecdote where he spoke up to Ron and Peter and told them a different direction. Do you remember the specifics of that? What he said to them?
Yeah, no, I do for sure. It's just in that COVID season, and it was just a lot of unknown about which way to go and what we can do on some different things. And without getting into all the specifics, he just took in different information and from his own perspective, and was able to explain to Ron, Peter, myself, et cetera, hey, I think this is a better path for the organization, for the players. This is kind of that perspective that, and that maybe Ron had a different take at that time. And again, like Ron had a ton of respect for Craig, and I think it grew in that meeting. Somebody that's able to speak their mind and do it in a really good fashion. And that's just stuck with me in terms of somebody that, he's going to have his own takes and thoughts, and he's going to take in information from, all the different angles that an organization provides to him and that the staff and players give to him, and then make a call. And that's kind of the job, is like, again, like we, the best guys in any of these leadership roles, they're able to take in a lot of opinions and information, and then ultimately come up with something that they believe in. And they're, if they're good at it, they're making good decisions most of the time. And I think Craig showed that in that setting, and I think he's going to show it as a manager.
Why was he in that meeting? Was that all the players? Was that?
No, just because he was a leader. He was somebody that the players that spoke for the players and had a good feel, and he just had a good idea for industry-wide what was going on. And he's just somebody that, again, like as a player, was always had a unique perspective and a little different look, and the players had a lot of confidence and faith in him for sure.
Craig mentioned the relationship factor with you as well. Did you have to assure him that you expect to have an extension coming shortly?
Yeah, we talked about it. I mean, like Craig asked those questions. I think, honestly, most of the candidates, I think all of them actually asked those questions, in terms of, obviously you sign up for the job, that relationship, general manager, and, just talking about what that looks like. So that was definitely a question that all the candidates talked about. Craig specifically, I think he's signing up, because he has a lot of trust and belief in the organization. And, it's Josh, it's myself, it's the player development staff. I got a million texts from player development people that were super fired up when they heard that Craig was the selection. It's the whole front office, and it's our players. Like Craig has a belief in our players, whereas it's sometimes in an interview setting you're going to say, hey, I believe in this player or that player. Craig, like, he's lived with those guys, he's dressed with them, he knows them well. So I think for all of those reasons, I think it's important to Craig, like him being familiar with our group. I think him understanding, like, what the organization is about, and I think it was important for him, like in his decision as well.
What did you tell him about your own status then? And are you going to make people go to Vegas to find out?
No, I mean, I think John was able to. John talked about, hey, he was able to talk to any candidate that had questions about what it all, in terms of, my contract situation, and he's talked to, he had spent time one-on-one with Craig. He spent one-on-one time with all the candidates to talk about, his vision, his belief. I'm, like I've said before, I'm looking forward to being here for a long time, and I'll continue having those conversations and see where it goes.
Expect to have that resolved this offseason?
I mean, I don't know. I'm under contract for next year. I think, to me, again, like I've said all the time, I love San Diego and the city and the organization, and it's something that I enjoy my job and hopefully do an okay job with it. But also under contract for next year, and like we're in a spot where we've got to go put a coaching staff together. We've got to, free agency and trades is starting. We're leaving here in a few minutes to go to the GM meetings and kind of kick off the offseason. So I think that's really the focus, and I'll continue to have conversations with John about my contract.
Is the ball more in your court or their court?
It's like anything. It's a relationship. It's both. So ultimately, I'm open to having those conversations. I think we've agreed, like let's focus on the manager and get started with the off season, and then we'll continue talking as we go through it.
I guess here until the winter meetings, we have to get winter top coming.
I mean, again, he's been on the scene for a long time, so our staff, takes a lot of pride in knowing the players in MPB. Obviously he's done some great things from a power standpoint, and it's exciting to see talent come over from Japan and from MPB, and he's another kind of the latest in the line in the last few years. There's some super talented players that are coming. We'll be prepared.
How aggressive do you feel like you're going to have to be able to do that? Or will you be?
I don't know. I mean, I think like in general, it's there's a premium on just talented players. So free agency, you always have to be, I think, pretty aggressive in general. But we'll have our target and our pref list, and we're going to look to add to the offense. We're definitely going to look to continue filling out the pitching staff. But that's kind of what we get into here starting this week, is kind of ranking those guys and starting to hear more what the players are interested in and what their fits are, and we'll see where it goes.
There's a national report that you guys could be looking to trade Tatis. Is there anything you want to address on that?
No, I didn't see that, so that's kind of news to me. I think again, like our team, our core, we have a lot of belief in the group, and Fernando, as much as anybody, he's just come off a season where he won the platinum glove. He played close to 162. He's one of the most talented players in the game. I think you talk to Fernando, he'll be the first to tell you, like, yeah, I think there's another step or stage that I can get to that we're probably going to need if we're going to look to win championships here. And we've seen a lot here in San Diego, his ability to do that. So I think that's the exciting part, is kind of getting now, after the hiring of Craig, putting a staff together so we can start having those conversations with Toddy about, all right, what is that next step? If we're going to look up and you're having that MVP season that we all know he's capable of, what does he need to do it, and what does that look like here in San Diego? So again, we have a really good core. I think we're looking to fill out and fill out the roster around that core. And we have a team that we believe a lot in. Toddy's at the top of that list.
Thank you.